Good evening. The video I have for you tonight is going to be probably of most interest to my regular viewers on my channel here, our fans, or my fans, our fans. And should be also to interest of people who are interested in learning something about the Automotive Center Stuttgart, on how Porsche, Robert Bosch, and Mercedes-Benz basically fit together in a very small area, on how this actually relates and how my company actually came about and where we started and when we started. So what you're seeing here is Google Earth, sorry, and we have here Stuttgart. This part here is the city center of Stuttgart, basically right here. I have turned off the names for all the different places because otherwise it's gonna be difficult to see all these different marks. Now, my company's birthplace is here. And this is in Leonberg, and you can see this is the Robert Bosch headquarters here. We will go there. We will take you to the Porsche R&D Center, to the Robert Bosch R&D Center, to Porsche headquarters, to Robert Bosch Manufacturing, and the SEL, which was Standard Electric Lawrence, which was the primary electronic company which developed all these electronics. And then, of course, MB, Mercedes-Benz headquarters, the two factories they have in Hedelfingen and Mettingen, and then of course Sindelfingen, which is the main facility where they assemble the vehicles. But let me start here, and I will explain this a little bit on how close this is. Let me just show you actually the closeness of this. First of all, we're going to do it in miles, and let me move this over here. I hope this is going to work now. So we go from my company, and you can see to Sindelfingen it was about 7 miles. Mercedes-Benz headquarters 10 miles, or almost 11 miles. Porsche 6 miles. Robert Bosch R&D 6 miles. SEL headquarters 7 miles. The Robert Bosch manufacturing facility 7 miles, and then Hedelfingen, that's the transmission factory, and so is Mettingen. That's where they make the cylinder heads actually. Or was it backwards? I can't remember. In Hedelfingen, I think they make the transmission, or used to make the transmissions, and in Mettingen, that's where they did the cylinders, the pistons, cylinder blocks, pistons, and the heads were basically made there, cast there, and then machined there, and then they were transported from there. Oops, I didn't want that. Let me do that again. Here to the headquarters. You will see how close this is. So the furthest place was Mettingen or Hedelfingen, which was around 13 miles from my company. So I could, within like, I would say less than a 15-mile radius, it's not even a 15-mile, a 12-mile radius, I covered everything automotive, which has anything to do with the automotive industry, if it comes to engine control systems primarily. And Jetronic, of course, was the primary thing, the KE Jetronic, and then the further development from the KE Jetronic over to the W140 series. That was the one I was primarily involved in for the V8 and V12 cylinder engines, for the, the 190 and the 120 engine. But let me get started here so you can see this. This is how close this is. First of all, I grew up in this little town. Oops, let me close this off. Close this. I grew up in this town here, which is called Ditzingen. And this is where my company originated. This is right here. And I'm going to zoom in here. I think I got the 3D images on here. And this doesn't always look like this here. This was our office building, or this was my office building, and I had the top floor here, which is the third floor, I think. First floor, ground floor, first, second, third, fourth floor. That's the elevator tower. And it didn't look like this back then. This is what it looks like today. Back then it looked like this here. You can see this. This was the actual office building. This was the top floor here. This is the elevator room up here. And we had actually started out, this was an old factory for frames, for glasses and frames. And Christofek was the name of the owner. And Christofek had gone out of business, and his son, who was living, he had passed away, and his son, his oldest son, and his wife, basically the widow, that was all abandoned, and they had rented out up here. This was like an old, that was the apartment building for the factory where the janitor would live and a couple other people. So on the first floor we had a shop in there, a carpenter shop specialized in old furniture. And then here on the second floor there was a young people in there who had a band, and they used it as a practice room. And then there were two apartments up here. This was empty, this was office space, and this down here was empty. And then there was an apartment here and an apartment here. So we moved in here first because my friend Bernie, which is not Bernie Sanders, but Bernie who lived out in Weissach, he wanted to do photography, and he needed a dark room for this. And I said I needed a dark room to make my circuit board, since it is a photographic process. So this is how I met Christofek, was through Bernie. And then Bernie set up his photo lab here in that old apartment. We converted that over. We converted the bathroom over into the dark room, and I had moved in here to the top floor. The second and third floor were empty. There was nothing there. And on the first floor there was a guy who was building these big tall grandpa clocks, you know, with the pendulum, when they make dong 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 every hour, and then a ding every 15 minutes. They were in here. I had marked this picture out a long time ago. I cannot erase these two marks, but that's the only picture I actually have from back then. Christofek also built this apartment complex before his frame factory went into bankruptcy. And they still owned the property, and they owned this property here. And this was basically all the manufacturing in this building here. And you can see this now when we go to Google Maps. The manufacturing building was torn down, and so was the old apartment building, which was here. This is still the apartment building they own, and they sold this building where I was in to the Catholic charity, to the German Catholic charity, Diakonische Werk, I think it is. And they have remodeled this, obviously, and basically moved in there. So I thought that this had gone too in this. You can see this here now from the front of what this looks like. So this was my office up here in the front, and then I had my electronic shop up here, and that was the elevator room. So this is still standing today. This is this here. Unfortunately, you can't, the picture is not that of a great quality. But this is where this started. January 1st, 1987. I almost said 97. 87, that's when I started with INOVA HIGHTECH, the channel you're watching. And what we do is we do the R&D for electronic process control and microcontroller based equipment, or whatever the customer needs. That is our specialty, writing the software in assembler and in C, and designing the circuit boards, the entire hardware that comes with it. And to a certain extent we do small production runs, say like anything less than 250 or 500 units per run, and we're still doing this today, 35 years later, or 40 years almost later, 35 years. 30, is it 35? Yeah, my God, time flies. So this is where this all started. And the first customer I actually had we go back here. So my building is still here. My office is still here 35 years later. Now we have the nannies in there. And they're doing what they're doing, I guess. And the first, like I said, as I had shared that in my other videos, my first customer was SEL, and they are over here. And today, this was their building here. This is Stuttgart-Zuffenhausen. This was the corporate headquarters of Standard Electric Lawrence. And all of this here was their manufacturing facility. All of this stuff here was there. And they were specialized in telecommunication equipment and radio equipment, a lot of military stuff. And they did, I believe, this was the R&D center here back then already. Let me just zoom in here so you can see this better. This was their corporate headquarters, that triangular shaped building, or that star-shaped building. And then you have right across the street here, this is the Porsche headquarters. They have now expanded over here. This used to be a grass area. There was, if I remember that correctly, there was nothing here. But I think they had this part. This is all Porsche today. This old building here was already in existence. That was Porsche back then. But this here was all grass area, what they have expanded into. And this is the Porsche main office building. This is the Porsche World Headquarters right here. And that's where they do part of their R&D. And, but anyway, so my customer was SEL, and that's where I was working because of my classmates. And the SEL people, they were doing the electronics work for Porsche, for Bosch, and for Mercedes-Benz, designing circuit boards and writing software, assembler software in those days. The other thing is, my friend Rolf, he owned, where is this building now here? Where's Rolf at? Here. Is it right here? No. Now I can't find Rolf anymore. My God, this has been, oh yeah, that was right here. This is Rolf's building. Rolf hit basically the jackpot. This is his office building he had. He lived here on the top floor. That used to be a penthouse with a big jacuzzi. And there were all sorts of stuff going on here. You can see this. That was his, back then, you can see this right here. This was actually his penthouse. This stuff hasn't been built yet. He sold this entire complex to Porsche, and he made a fortune for it about 15 years ago when they started to expand like crazy. At the time when I was there, basically this was the Porsche factory with the old building over here. None of this stuff existed. And when SEL went into bankruptcy in the 1990s, I was already in America, all of this area became available, and Porsche bought this too. So all of this stuff today is Porsche. SEL is no longer there. And so this is how I got into Bosch. This is how I got into Mercedes-Benz, and not so much Porsche. That was the requirements right at that time in 1987 was very different, because Mercedes-Benz was working on the 119 and 120 engine. So that was the primary focus. And again, here's my company, and this is the Robert Bosch World Headquarters. That's the corporate office right here. And they also built this in that star-shaped thing the same way SEL did this. And we can see that they actually have a helipad here. If it Google Chrome lets me zoom in here. This here is their helipad, or that was their helipad. And this building back here is all R&D, or was R&D at that time. And then we have to go here. We go over to Schwieberdingen. Then you see here, this is actually the Robert Bosch Automotive Division. This is where they built most of the stuff. And that's where a lot of the design work was done. It was done up on the hill where I was at, and down here. And you can see this here, that they have also on their test track a helicopter pad. So they can fly from the headquarters to the R&D facility, even though this is only like 10 miles apart. Let me see how far this is. This is not a great distance. But this is basically what they did. So if we go from here, I gotta move this thing here a little bit out of the way. Yeah, that's barely 7 miles. That's not worth it, but the traffic sometimes is so bad, and they flew obviously over there. That's what they're doing. Let me close this back out. So this is where they did all the development. You can see the test track back here for the ABS systems, for the SRS system, for the airbag stuff. All of the stuff came from Bosch, and so did the Jetronic. So all engine-related tests and that sort of stuff was all done in this complex. So this is the entire Bosch facility. This is pretty large, this thing. So I was over here during that time, and this is where your favorite parts were invented, basically. The EHA valve, the warm-up regulator or control pressure regulator, and all the ECU units which came with it, and the timing valve, and your fuel distributor in general. This is the birthplace of the Jetronic. And the Jetronic was basically a further development from the Bosch diesel injection system they had come out with in the 50s, in the 1950s, for the diesel engines. And this is the Porsche R&D center out here in the middle of nowhere, and you can see this. So they have a test track here as well. I have been through all the test tracks, and this is their facility. Now this is the Porsche R&D center, where they also do the R&D for other car manufacturers like Volkswagen, or I don't know who else went there. But whoever comes to Porsche, this is the place where they actually develop all of the things, whatever the customer wants. And then of course we have Mercedes-Benz over here, and I had shown this here. This is right here, the headquarters. I made the other video about it, and here you can see the Mercedes-Benz test track. This is right here, this part here. I don't know, I think Google told me that they're downloading a new database, and it looks like that is not going too fast. But you can see this here. So this is the engine assembly and manufacturing. The piston rods were made here. I know that because in that building, in this building here, this was the building where they had the big presses. And they came down and made boom, boom, boom. I mean, the noise was just unbelievable. When they formed these rods, they were basically pressed, cold pressed, I believe that's what you call it. So when you go down here, this is the Hedelfing, this is the transmission facility. This is where they build all of the transmissions, all in this area and all of this area here in these areas. And then Mettingen is this whole area back here. And I believe this is where they also, yeah, that's where they made the engine blocks, the cylinder heads, and a few other parts related. I think the piston. If the pistons didn't come from Mahle, then they were made here if they made their own stuff. This was all foundry kind of stuff, what they were doing here. Like they were doing the complete engine blocks, casting them in aluminum, and they were then pre-machined, and then that was moved over by truck over here to Untertürkheim into this facility, and then the engine making process basically started to happen here. That's why that was together. And the engines went from here, from the headquarters, out to Sindelfingen, to the main assembly plant, and so did then the transmission from Hedelfingen. The engine parts out of Mettingen, they went to Untertürkheim. So this is the connection here and here, and there were 2 or 3 other facilities. And this is Mercedes-Benz Sindelfingen. This is the main factory where they actually make the cars. All of this area here. It is a massive, massive, massive area. And of course, they have another test track out here, and I have been on that test track at all. So we have a total of 1, 2, 3 test tracks. 4 test tracks with Bosch. Bosch has the smallest one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 test tracks in that area in a what did we say, 12-mile radius. Just that you have an idea of what that looked like it. And now the main factory for Bosch, where they actually made those parts, for the better part, the automotive parts, most of it was done out in Schwieberdingen. What was not made in Schwieberdingen originated here in this area. All of this is the Bosch factory, where most of the other automotive stuff started. And of course, they had other factories all across Germany where they made the headlights, and they made light bulbs, and they made the switches, and they made this and that and the other thing. But if it was engine related and that sort of stuff, the Jetronic related items, this was done here and in Schwieberdingen. And this is, Bosch started out as being a precision mechanic. That's probably the best way to say that, which is like a watchmaker for engines. The precision of a watchmaker, that's what they applied to that when he started. So this should give you a little idea on how this all interrelates in a 12-mile radius. And I hope you liked this video, and you got a better idea now what this actually looked like it and how involved. There was virtually no way of getting around it. The military stuff over here was in Ludwigsburg I did, and at the barracks up here in Stuttgart Nord, up here at the barracks, I forgot it now what that was. They were, well, anyway, it's probably not that important. But this is basically on how this all was interrelated here. I guess we're getting now some rivers here. They're showing now, what is it, the railroads. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you, and I hope you liked it, and I hope you had the patience to sit through this. And with that, thank you very much, and you have a great night.